Three levels of faith God wants to lead you through. Which one are you in? There are moments in life when you think you know what faith is until the ground beneath you starts to shake. You pray, you declare, you believe, but somewhere deep inside you start to realize that faith isn't just about words or feelings, it's about endurance. Real faith is not built when everything goes right. It's forged in the silence, in the confusion, in the seasons when God seems to disappear just to see if you'll still trust Him. That's the place where most people either break or rise. Faith is not a single step you take once in your life. It's a journey that unfolds through levels, and each level reveals something new about who God really is. At first, faith feels easy because God lets you taste His goodness. You see answered prayers, doors opening, miracles happening, and it strengthens you. But soon, He invites you higher, to believe without seeing, to walk without knowing, and to stand even when everything in you wants to run. That's when faith stops being theory and starts becoming relationship. God never designed faith to be static. It grows, it stretches, it gets tested. And each time you think you've mastered it, He takes you deeper, because His goal is not to make you comfortable. It's to make you unshakable. You see, the faith that simply believes what it sees can never stand in a storm. But the faith that has been refined by fire, tested by loss, and strengthened by obedience, that kind of faith moves mountains. The Bible shows us this journey over and over again. Abraham had to believe for a son, then believe again when God asked for that same son back. Peter had to believe enough to step out of the boat, but also believe when he started to sink. Job had to believe even when every reason to believe was gone. Each of them reached a level of faith that wasn't built by success, but by surrender. God is calling you to grow in faith, not because He wants to test you, but because He wants to trust you. The deeper your faith goes, the more heaven can flow through you. It's not about perfection, it's about progression. The question is, which level are you in right now? Are you still believing only when you see, or have you learned to trust when you don't understand? Because the moment you begin to see faith as a journey, not a moment, that's when your relationship with God starts to transform from surface belief into supernatural trust. Number 1, the beginning level. Faith that believes what it sees. At the beginning of your walk with God, faith often feels simple. You pray and He answers. You ask for help and somehow provision shows up. You cry out and comfort comes. It's the season when you can clearly see God's hand moving, and it strengthens your belief that He is real. This is the starting point, the faith that believes, because it sees. It's not wrong, it's foundational. God allows this stage so that you can taste His goodness and learn that He is trustworthy. Think about Thomas, the disciple who said he wouldn't believe unless he could touch Jesus' wounds. When Jesus appeared, He didn't reject Thomas. He invited him closer, letting him touch and see for himself. That's how merciful God is. He meets you where you are, even when your faith is weak, but then He calls you to something higher. Blessed are those who have not seen, and yet have believed. Those words weren't meant to shame Thomas. They were an invitation to all of us to grow beyond what we can see. This beginning level of faith is where most Christians stay for a long time. It's comfortable, predictable, emotionally rewarding. We feel secure when we can trace God's fingerprints on everything. We praise Him for answered prayers, for healed bodies, for promotions, for open doors, and that's good. But if we're honest, this kind of faith still depends on visible results. When things go quiet, our confidence begins to fade. When the blessing delays, our trust begins to shake. God uses this first stage to build a foundation of trust, but He never intended you to live here forever. If faith only thrives in comfort, it will collapse in crisis. That's why He sometimes hides His hand, to teach you to trust His heart. Because real faith isn't proven when you get what you asked for. It's proven when you keep believing even when you don't. At this level, God is still revealing himself as provider, healer, and deliverer. So you can recognize his power. But as your relationship deepens, he will start to shift your attention from his gifts to his character. He wants to move you from seeing his hand to knowing his heart. That's when faith begins to grow roots. When it's no longer about evidence but about relationship. This is the threshold. Beyond it lies a higher level of faith, the kind that believes before it sees. Number 2, the growing level. Faith that believes before seeing. Faith. This is where faith starts to stretch. The easy days of quick answers begin to fade, and suddenly silence becomes your teacher. You still believe God can, but now you're learning to trust that he will even when nothing around you supports it. This is the level where God stops showing up immediately. Not because he's left you, but because he's trying to mature you. The miracles that once came easily now seem delayed. The signs that used to reassure you are replaced with stillness. And it's in that stillness that God whispers, "Will you still believe me when you can't see me?" This is the kind of faith Abraham had when God told him he would be the father of many nations. Yet he was old, his wife was barren, and every fact contradicted the promise. Still, Abraham believed. He built altars instead of excuses. He looked up at the stars and chose to trust the one who made them. That's the difference between faith that reacts and faith that rests. Growing faith doesn't need evidence to believe. It needs God's word. Noah built an ark before a single drop of rain ever fell. There was no storm on the horizon, no cloud in the sky, no proof that what God said would come true. But Noah moved anyway. That's the heartbeat of this level. Acting on what God said, not on what your eyes see. You begin to realize that obedience is proof of faith. If you wait until everything makes sense, you'll never move. Faith moves first, and the understanding comes later. But this level is not easy. It's often lonely. Friends might question you. Logic will fight you. Doubt will whisper that you're wasting your time. You'll be tempted to go back to comfort, to live only by what you can see again. Yet it's in this tension that faith starts to grow muscle. The waiting seasons are not punishment. They are preparation. God delays not to discourage you, but to develop you. When your prayers seem unanswered, he's not ignoring you. He's deepening you. He's teaching you that his promises don't expire just because time passes. Faith that believes before seeing has to face silence without surrender, contradiction without compromise, and delay without despair. And every time you choose to keep trusting, you're growing into the kind of believer who can carry bigger promises. At this stage, God is shaping your faith to rely not on outcomes, but on his character. You begin to pray differently, think differently, and walk differently. You start believing that the unseen is more real than the visible. That's when heaven begins to move quietly behind the scenes, because faith that believes before seeing always catches God's attention. Number 3, the tested level. Faith that stands when nothing makes sense. This is the place where faith goes from being inspiring to being costly. It's not the kind of faith that lives in the light of answered prayers. It's the kind that survives the darkness of unanswered ones. You've believed before seeing. You've waited through the silence, and now you're walking through fire. Nothing adds up. The situation looks impossible, and heaven feels quiet. You pray, but the heavens don't respond. You worship, but the feeling is gone. You search for direction, and all you get is stillness. This is not punishment, it's promotion. Because every true servant of God must pass through the furnace of tested faith. Job understood this level. He lost everything, his wealth, his health, his family, and still said, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. That's not blind optimism. That's the kind of faith that refuses to let go, even when God feels far away. Job didn't understand why everything fell apart. But even in confusion, he clung to God's character. That's what tested faith looks like. It holds on to who God is when you can't make sense of what God is doing. At this level, your faith is purified. Everything shallow is stripped away. You stop believing because it's easy and start believing because it's right. You discover that faith isn't about feelings. It's about loyalty. It's easy to praise God when life is peaceful, but true faith praises Him from the ashes. That's the difference between the kind of faith that needs blessings to survive and the kind that becomes the blessing itself. Sometimes God allows confusion, not to break you, but to reveal you. He wants you to see that your faith was never meant to depend on explanations. When you can't trace His hand, you're learning to trust His heart. When everything goes silent, He's not gone. He's watching to see if you'll still walk by faith and not by sight. This is the season when your worship becomes pure. You no longer worship for what God gives, but for who He is. It's the moment you stop asking, "Why me?" and start saying, "Use me." You begin to realize that unshakable faith is not built in blessings, it's built in battles. And here's the beautiful truth. The silence doesn't mean abandonment. It means God is trusting you with the test. The enemy wants to use it to destroy you, but God is using it to deepen you. Every unanswered prayer, every closed door, every delay, it's not rejection, it's refinement. Because when your faith can stand, when nothing makes sense, you've reached a place where no storm can shake you anymore. That's the faith that makes hell tremble and heaven move. Number 4, the obedient level. Faith that walks without full understanding. This is the level where faith stops being a feeling and becomes a lifestyle. You no longer wait to understand everything before you obey. You move because you've learned that obedience is understanding. God gives you an instruction that doesn't make sense, and your heart hesitates for a moment. But then something inside you says, "I trust Him enough to move anyway." That's obedience born out of faith. It's the moment when belief transforms into action. Abraham knew this level of faith better than anyone. When God told him to sacrifice Isaac, it made no logical sense. The very son he had waited decades for, the promise God Himself gave, was now being placed on the altar. Most of us would have argued, delayed, or begged for a clearer word, but Abraham rose early in the morning and went. He didn't understand, but he trusted the one who gave the command. And in that act of obedience, God revealed Himself in a new way. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. Abraham's obedience didn't just prove his faith, it unlocked God's next revelation. Peter also experienced this level when Jesus called him out of the boat. The storm was raging, the waves were high, and everything logical said, "Stay inside." But Peter stepped out anyway. For a moment he walked on water, not because he understood the physics, but because he trusted the voice that called him. Faith doesn't require explanation, it requires motion. The moment you obey, even trembling, heaven begins to respond. This kind of faith costs something. It costs your comfort, your control, your pride. It's one thing to say, "God, I trust you," and another to prove it when obedience leads into the unknown. But this is where the deepest growth happens. You begin to see that obedience is not God testing your willpower. It's Him inviting you into partnership. Every step of obedience connects heaven's purpose to your life. There will be times when God asks you to give up something precious, a relationship, a plan, a dream, and you'll feel torn between logic and loyalty. But when you choose to obey, even through tears, you enter a deeper level of spiritual authority, because obedience is the language of trust, and God reveals His power to those who speak it fluently. When you walk in obedience, you stop asking, "What if I fail?" and start asking, "What if God moves?" You begin to realize that you don't need to see the whole path, just the next step. And when you take it, Miracles follow obedience, like shadows follow light. This level of faith walks boldly through uncertainty, because it knows that wherever obedience leads, God's presence is already there waiting. Number 5. The dependent level. Faith that rests in God's nature. At this level, faith begins to look different. It's quieter, deeper and anchored, not in circumstances, not in outcomes, but in who God is. You no longer feel the need to strive, to prove, or to push. You've learned that true faith is not frantic, it's restful. The soul that once wrestled for control finally breathes and says, God, I trust you even here. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Because when you truly know His nature, you stop trying to manipulate the outcome. You simply rest in the fact that He is good and He cannot fail. This kind of faith is built after many storms. You've walked through the confusion, you've been tested in silence, you've obeyed when it hurt, and now you've learned that peace is not found in knowing what's next, but in knowing who's leading you. The heart that used to panic now stays still, because it has seen too much of God's faithfulness to fear what's coming. This is the be still and know that I am God kind of faith. Think of Jesus sleeping in the boat while the storm raged. The disciples were terrified, but He rested. Why? Because He wasn't controlled by the chaos around Him. He was anchored in the Father's authority within Him. That's what dependent faith looks like. It doesn't deny the storm. It refuses to be shaken by it. It knows that even when the waves rise, God remains in control. At this stage, faith is no longer about getting things from God. It's about staying connected to Him. You stop striving to make things happen and start trusting that God's timing is perfect. You realize that your strength can't sustain the promise. Only His grace can. So instead of trying to force doors open, you wait. Instead of worrying about provision, you rest in His promises. That's what it means to depend on God's nature. The beauty of this level is the peace that follows it. You're no longer tormented by every delay or afraid of every storm. You've learned to say, even if it doesn't happen the way I expect, I know God's still good. You've exchanged anxiety for assurance, striving for surrender. Dependent faith isn't passive, it's powerful. It stands still not because it's given up, because it's confident that God is moving even when you can't see it. It's the kind of faith that calms your spirit while the world around you shakes. And once you reach this place, you realize something profound. The greatest sign of faith isn't always movement, it's rest. When your heart is at rest in God's nature, no storm, no delay, and no disappointment can pull you away from His peace. Number 6, the intimate level. Faith that hears and flows with God. At this level, faith is no longer just about believing in God. It's about walking with Him. You move from following commands to understanding His heart. You no longer pray only for God to act on your behalf. Instead, you learn to listen for His heartbeat and move in sync with His will. This is the level of friendship with God, where faith becomes conversation and obedience becomes instinct. It's not about reacting anymore. It's about flowing. Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more, because God took him. That single verse in Genesis carries a mystery most believers never explore. Enoch didn't just believe that God existed. He lived in such deep communion that heaven and earth seemed to overlap in his daily life. That's intimate faith. It lives in awareness of God's presence, even in the ordinary. It doesn't wait for Sunday mornings or emotional moments. It listens in stillness, hears in silence, and obeys without delay. Jesus walked in this same kind of faith. He said, I do nothing on my own, but only what I see the Father doing. That means His miracles were not random acts. They were the fruit of intimacy. When your faith reaches this level, you begin to sense God's movement before you see it. You start recognizing his whisper amid the noise. You no longer pray just to be heard. You pray to hear. And when you do, your life starts flowing in divine rhythm. At this level, faith stops striving to convince God and starts aligning with him. You become sensitive to his nudges, his timing, his direction. It's as if your spirit has learned a new language, the language of trust. You stop asking, God, is this your will? And start saying, God, let me walk with you in it. This intimacy doesn't happen overnight. It's cultivated through consistency, through quiet moments when no one's watching, through surrendering the distractions that dull your sensitivity. The closer you get to God, the clearer your faith becomes. You begin to see through his perspective. You start responding with love, acting with patience, and moving with boldness, not because you're confident in yourself, but because you're tuned to his voice. The fruit of intimate faith is effortless obedience. You don't have to force it. It flows naturally, because your heart is connected to his. It's the difference between religion and relationship, between duty and delight. And when you walk at this level, miracles follow not because you chase them, but because you're walking with the one who performs them. This is where faith becomes a dance with the divine, a partnership that turns your steps into purpose, your silence into strength, and your obedience into overflow. The more you walk with him, the more your life begins to reflect his light without even trying. That's intimate faith, the faith that doesn't just believe God works, it walks with him while he does. Number 7, the surrendered level, faith that lets God be God. This is the highest and most sacred level of faith, the place where trust becomes total and surrender becomes worship. It's not about asking God to fit into your plans anymore. It's about laying down your plans so that his will can unfold even when it costs you everything. This level is not loud or dramatic, it's quiet, pure, and holy. It's the kind of faith that releases control and says, Lord, even if you never do what I hoped, I will still love you. Even if the answer is no, you are still good. This is the faith Jesus displayed in Gethsemane, the night before the cross, with sweat like drops of blood falling to the ground. He prayed, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. That is surrendered faith when love for God outweighs the desire for comfort. Jesus had the power to call down angels to stop everything, to change the plan, but he chose to trust the Father's will instead. That decision didn't just save the world, it revealed the deepest form of faith the universe has ever witnessed. Surrendered faith doesn't fight for control. It rests in the sovereignty of God. It stops wrestling with the question why, and begins to trust the one who knows why. It no longer demands understanding. It offers worship. You come to realize that faith isn't about getting your way. It's about letting God have his. Because when you finally let go, you make room for him to move in ways far beyond your imagination. This level of faith changes everything. You stop seeing trials as punishment and start seeing them as pathways to purpose. You stop measuring God's goodness by your circumstances and start measuring your circumstances by his goodness. You understand that his no is as holy as his yes, because both come from the same heart of love. At this stage, peace no longer depends on outcomes. You find serenity even in suffering, purpose even in pain. You discover a kind of unexplainable joy that doesn't need perfect conditions. It simply needs his presence. The surrendered believer no longer fears loss because everything has already been placed on the altar. When your faith reaches this level, life becomes lighter. You stop striving to prove, fix, or control. You walk in a calm authority that comes from total dependence. People around you might not understand it. They'll wonder how you stay calm in chaos, how you smile in uncertainty. But it's because you've learned a secret: real faith doesn't always change your situation. And in that transformation, you become a living testimony. Your life whispers the same words Jesus spoke in Gethsemane. Not my will, but yours. That's the summit of faith. The moment when you stop trying to be the author of your own story and let God write it instead. And when He does, every line, every delay, every detour suddenly makes sense in His perfect timing. That's surrendered faith. The kind that not only trusts God with the outcome but worships Him through it. Conclusion. Faith is a journey, not a destination. Faith is not a straight line. It's a divine ascent. From the moment you first believe, God begins guiding you through levels that stretch your heart, refine your trust, and deepen your understanding of who He is. Every stage has its purpose. The beginning faith teaches you that God is real. The growing faith teaches you that He's faithful. The tested faith teaches you that He's enough. The obedient faith teaches you that His ways are higher. The dependent faith teaches you to rest. The intimate faith teaches you to listen. And the surrendered faith teaches you to let go and let Him be God. Every believer starts somewhere different, but God's goal for all of us is the same: to lead us into a relationship so real, so unshakable, that we trust Him even when nothing makes sense. The journey upward is rarely comfortable, but it's always worth it, because every level strips away a layer of fear and replaces it with freedom. Every test removes another illusion of control and replaces it with peace. Every step deeper into faith takes you closer to the heart of God Himself. Maybe right now, you're at the beginning, where you need to see before you believe. Or maybe you're in that painful place of silence, where you're learning to trust without evidence. Maybe you're walking through testing, or struggling to obey something that doesn't make sense. Wherever you are, remember this: God isn't disappointed in your process. He's delighted by your progress. He's not in a hurry to finish you. He's committed to grow you. The faith isn't about pretending everything's fine. It's about believing that God is still good when everything isn't. It's the anchor that holds you when the storm hits, the light that keeps burning when the night feels endless. The higher your faith grows, the quieter it becomes, because mature faith no longer argues with God, it agrees with Him. In the end, real faith doesn't need proof. It becomes proof. It becomes the living evidence that God can take an ordinary life and turn it into a testimony of His power, His love, and His sovereignty. That's the life He wants for you. Not one without struggles, but one without fear. So ask yourself again, which level are you in? And more importantly, are you willing to let God take you higher? Because the journey of faith never truly ends. It just keeps leading you closer to Him. And when you finally learn to rest in His heart, to trust His timing, and to surrender your will, you'll discover what every saint before you has found: that the reward of faith was never the miracle. It was always Him.